That's very risky when you buy a house with only 3% down or zero, because an equity drop of any kind and you're underwater. But most of that risk falls on the lender, not the home buyer, because in many states, as you know, the home buyer can walk away with little or no consequence. And the upside is enormous. At that point, in the 2004-2005 period, when this was really in its heyday, housing prices were appreciating in double digits in many low-income markets. What a bargain. You have a chance for a 2-digit return, and the downside risk is zero. You have none of your own skin in the game, or a very small amount of your own money in the game. So that was not a mistake. The puzzle isn't why people borrowed money that they had, eventually many of them unfortunately could not pay back. The puzzle is, why did anyone lend them money? And it turns out that the people who lent that money ultimately were lending it with borrowed money too. They're playing the same game. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and Bear Stearns put as little as $3 for every 100 they invested in the housing market. They're playing the same game as the homeowner. Highly risky. Big upside, small downside. A great game to be able to play. I'd love to play that game. But you can only do that with borrowed money. And the puzzle then is, why did anyone lend them the money to play that risky game? Some people say those who lent the money were stupid. They made mistakes. People were greedy, arrogant, myopic. They had hubris. They were overconfident. They trusted their mathematical models, as if greed was invented in 2004. I think it goes back to roughly Garden of Eden. So the puzzle isn't, greed had something to do with it, absolutely. But the fundamental question is, what unleashed that greed that used to restrain it? I have a simpler answer. The people who lent that money were not stupid. They weren't arrogant. They were smart. You know why I say that? Because the people who allegedly made those mistakes made a whole lot of money. They did precisely what the incentives told them to do. If you can borrow money to finance your risk-taking, if you can borrow money to finance your bets, then you leverage. You borrow to the hilt. Why did they lend the money? Because they were insulated from the losses. They thought they would be. Between 2000 and 2008, the top 5 executives at Bear Stearns, top 5 executives, the CEO and the next 4 folks, they made $1.5 billion in compensation. 1.5. Now, if they hadn't gone broke, they would have made more. It's true. They didn't want to go broke. They weren't planning to go broke and get bought out at $2 a share. When the stock was at $172 at Bear Stearns, and these executives held that stock, they'd have hoped it would stay there, but the game they were playing didn't allow it. And so they did lose some paper losses. And don't you feel sorry for them? That CEO of Bear Stearns, Jimmy Kane, having to get by on a mere $500 million. $500 million. It'd be nicer to make $1.5 billion. He did lose $1 billion on paper, but my claim is he couldn't have sold that stock anyway. So he was stuck with a mere $500 million. Richard Fuld, the CEO of Lehman Brothers, the top 5 execs at Lehman, expecting to be bailed out, their lenders. They weren't. They were the lesson. Or they didn't have the political pull, those creditors. So Lehman's creditors got stiffed. They lost all their money. The executives, their stock was worthless. And did they pay a price for that? Yeah, they only got $1 billion, the top 5. Average, $200 million apiece. Fuld sold, between 2003 and 2008, Fuld sold $500 million worth of Lehman Brothers stock. Funny thing, prudent with his own money, reckless with other people's money. Big surprise, isn't it? So it wasn't stupidity, it wasn't a mistake. It was a high-stakes game where heads, you win an unbelievably large amount, and tails, you just win an enormous amount. Right? What kind of a game is that? How do you get into that game? And by the way, Bear Stearns and Lehman, they're the losers. The losers. Think about that. Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan, the winners. You know what they're worth, those executives? That was the game that Bear and Lehman were in, maybe we could get to that level. Oh, but they didn't. They went bankrupt. They're lost. They were driven out. So they had to settle for a mere $200-300 million apiece. That's not capitalism. Who's paying for that? You and me. Taxpayers. We're the sucker at the poker table. You know, they say if you're at the poker table, you know who the sucker is? It's you. We didn't even know we were at the table. Right? We're going to be on the hook, I'm guessing, for maybe $1 trillion. So we're transferring, you know, right now it's a mere $300-400 billion, but it's not over yet. So tens of thousands of dollars are going to go from the average American family, tens of thousands, to the richest people in human history. Lloyd Blankfein and Richard Fuld and Jimmy Kane, these Wall Street investment bankers and their executives. Something desperately wrong about that. Desperately wrong. It's not capitalism. That is crony capitalism. We're told we had to bail out the losers in order to save capitalism, protect the stability of the system. In the name of that stability, we've transferred that money from average people to rich folks. And Lloyd Blankfein, who's the CEO of Goldman Sachs, the man who spoke to Hank Paulson 26 times the week of the AIG bailout, 26 times. What do you think they were talking about? Their kids? Hey, how the kids doing? He had the nerve to say last week in an interview that he and other investment bankers are doing God's work, allocating capital to its most highly valued use. It's quite a claim to make after the subprime meltdown, when we put $1.5 trillion in just 3 years. $1.5 trillion flowed through Wall Street and through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac into homes and bigger homes instead of into health care and more fuel-efficient cars and 1,000 other things that would have been more productive. But we created a financial system that misallocated $1.5 trillion, and we'll never get the benefits of that we could have had. And I say we created the current system because it coddles losers, creates the incentives for people to be reckless with other people's money. This has to stop. Give me less stability and more justice. Give me less stability today and more stability tomorrow. Let me close with a few suggestions for what I think could make the system a little better. And I would suggest that we all keep in mind the insight of Friedrich Hayek, Nobel laureate in economics, who said, "The curious task of economics is to demonstrate to men how little they really know about what they imagine they can design." So most of the mistakes that we suffer from in public policy comes from a hubris that we can, from the top down, be the puppeteer and figure out the right way, when in fact most successful systems emerge from the bottom up through trial and error. And yet each time Washington decides, well, we'll just have to do it better this time. We got to design a better system. This time will be different. It never is. So these are my policy advice. Don't try to recreate the old system of financial securitization and the old system of home ownership, and just make it better this time. There's a natural wariness about securitization. That's good. Let it blossom. There is a natural wariness about zero-down mortgages. The government's still trying to subsidize home ownership. We've got new programs. It's unbelievable. You know, it's like you got a patient who's got smallpox, and oh, let's give him tuberculosis too. It's a horrible idea. We should recognize that every American owning a home is not the American dream. It is the dream of the National Association of Home Builders.